So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Verna Lavender. What I'll do is I'll make a start. I run this workshop with my colleague Flick Cox, Felicity Cox, and we're just waiting for her to join. If she's not able to join, I will start presenting her slides. So let me just go on to the slideshow. So this workshop is focusing on writing for publication, and it's for people that are interested in writing for publication, have got data, have been doing service improvement projects, and so on, research, and wishing to publish that work. So I'm Verna Lavender, and I am the nursing research lead for the cancer and surgery clinical group, and Flick is the nursing research lead for the heart, lung and critical care clinical group. And Flick is an experienced researcher. She's published, and she's also very experienced research publication editor, and she has been on the editorial board for a number of publications. So this is Flick's slide, but just to say a bit about her, she's a nurse consultant in pain management. As I said, she's the heart lung critical care nursing research lead, and her experience in terms of publication is as a reviewer, author, editorial board member, and journal editor. And she's also a fellow of the Royal College of Nursing. She chairs the EFIC Pain Nursing Education Group and regularly leads and contributes to national and international guidance. And I'm just putting up some of her recent publications for reference. So just to sort of really highlight the work that she does in terms of pain management and her expertise in pain management research. So the kind of starting point for any publication is thinking about what's your idea, and this is for any kind of research or quality improvement or service evaluation project. So you start initially with an idea, and it may be that that idea is arisen from a clinical issue or a problem. So it may be that patients have complaints about something, and you want to look into why that might be, or it might be that there's been a series of clinical incidents of the same sort of nature or near misses, and you want to investigate that. Or it may be that you're bringing in a new system, and it's going to require some change, and there are some workarounds that might need to be used, and how can that better be implemented. So there can be a whole host of issues that you identify in clinical practice, and you want to investigate further and see if you can come up with a solution. It might be that you're interested in something. It could be that there's something novel or something that's highly specialist that you want to find out more about, and you think that due to the nature of it, you feel that other people could benefit from learning about it. And so my own area of expertise is cancer nursing, and in particular treating people with anti-cancer therapies. So it might be that I want to write something on a novel treatment and the side effects and the nursing care and management of patients that are receiving that treatment, because it is novel, and that other colleagues that are working in the field of cancer nursing might wish to learn about. So maybe it's I want to do something like a systematic review or a scoping review, write that up for publication, or even an education paper. It may be that they've conducted an audit or an evaluation. So have you got any standards in practice where you want to see are they being met or not? So do you collect information about key performance indicators, and you've got some new protocol in place or some new standards, and so you want to audit whether or not you're meeting those, or you've changed practice and you want to audit to see if the change in practice has had any effect on whether or not you meet those standards. Or maybe it's a service evaluation. An evaluation is an audit is where you assess something against a set standard, whereas an evaluation is where you explore how well we're doing or how well the service is doing. So maybe you've done something like a patient satisfaction or patient experience survey, and you want to report the findings of that. It might be that you want to focus on an area of excellent practice and as an exemplar of what good practice is, and you want to write a case study about that. And it could be that it's a case study about an individual patient. Maybe that you've got a patient that's presented with a very unusual or rare syndrome or disease, and there's learning to be got from that you want to be able to share. Or maybe it's a case study of a team or of a service. It might be there's a highly specialist service that you run and you want to share with other professionals what that service is and how that works. It may be that you've done coursework, so it might be that you've, for example, done a master's dissertation and you've done a dissertation project, and it might be that it's collected data, either research data or audit or evaluation data, or it might be that you've done a literature review, something like a narrative review or a systematic review as part of your coursework, and you wish to publish that as well. So there are lots of different types of publication, but the key thing is that you start off with what your idea is for what it is you're thinking of publishing, and having a really clear idea and having focus is absolutely key to getting things published successfully. So when you start with an idea, you always want to find out, you know, has somebody asked that question before? If they have, you know, what have they done about it? Have they tried any sort of novel intervention before? If so, what are their findings and what can you learn from that? Is there anything published on it? It might be that nothing's been published before. And if something been published, what are the gaps? And if you're thinking about doing something where you want to measure some outcomes, you also want to find out what sort of outcomes, what sort of measures have other people used. And to answer all of those sorts of questions, you need to do a literature search. So you want to undertake a literature search using a systematic search strategy. So you want to scan the literature and find out, has anyone written something similar before? If so, where have they published? Because that will give you an idea about where you might want to publish, what sorts of journals you might want to think about submitting your work to. What other evidence is there that can inform your idea? So sometimes it's by searching the electronic databases where published peer review literature is accessible, or it might be that you need to look at what we call grey literature and do a more comprehensive search. And so it might be that you do something like you search on Google Scholar, or you go onto the Department of Health, NHS England databases. So it might be you search for NICE guidance, or you search for government policy. It might be that you're looking at publications that other NHS organisations have published that aren't necessarily peer reviewed. Maybe you're interested in finding out about patients' experience, and you look at, for example, patients who have written blogs. Maybe there's something you find in social media. So there's a whole host of other literature you can look at to help inform your idea. You can also have a look at what might be published by professional groups and professional societies. Are there position statements, for example? Has someone published standards that you use for audit? So lots of things to consider looking at when you're thinking about your idea and crafting the question that you're going to be addressing for your particular study. It's important that when you identify literature for you to reference it, that you'll have a good sense of what's the quality of that literature and what's the quality of the body of current evidence overall. So you want to do a critical appraisal on any of the literature that you have sourced. So the key thing that you want to know is, you know, is that piece of work that's been published relevant to your topic, to your area of interest, and how's it relevant? So you need to determine those things first of all, and then what's the quality of that evidence? And if you get a lot of evidence that's really relevant and quite interesting, but it's not very high quality, then you would say, well, there's some interest in that, we know something about it, but there isn't really a body of evidence where you are able to make any recommendations just based on the literature. And that means that there's lots of gaps in the knowledge and evidence base to address. So it's really important to do the critical appraisal and provide some level of critique about what has been published before. How does that inform your ideas? So really think critically, not just in the terms of the quality of evidence, but what's been published. Does that make a difference about what you were thinking about doing? Does it, you know, are you left thinking, well, somebody's already done that, or they've done that, but they haven't really answered my question, and there's this gap, or there's nothing that's been published on this, and this is a completely novel idea. And maybe, you know, if you were planning to do something like an audit, you have to step back and say, well, we haven't got any standards yet. So what we really need to do is, first of all, do a bit of a service evaluation and just get some data and some evidence about how satisfied patients are with the service, what's their experience. Maybe collect data from staff about what's their experience as well. So then you need to decide, having done the work and got a clear idea about what the story is, what you want to write about, the focus of your publication, thinking about what type of publication it is. And again, it might be that you're publishing a case study, so that can be an individual, or it could be work of a team, or it could be a hospital site. Are you writing an opinion piece? Are you someone that's in a senior role, that you've got expert knowledge and you've got a good understanding of the evidence that's been published, and you want to submit what we call an opinion piece? You want to submit a manuscript that sort of kind of states a kind of a position or a stance on a certain aspect of practice. Maybe it's an educational article that others can use for their continuing professional development, because again, you've got expertise in that field. Perhaps it's a focus on disease or procedures, so you're talking about the kind of quality improvement initiative and sharing best practice. It could possibly be it's a reflection on practice, and it might be that it's you sharing findings from having done an audit, a service evaluation, or some research. So that's what you need to think about, is what sort of publication, and then which type of journal. Do you want to publish it in a journal where the manuscript will be peer reviewed, and that tends to have a higher level of impact? And it will get out to an audience of interested readers, or do you want to publish it in professional use, which has a kind of perhaps a wider audience, is not necessarily peer reviewed, and it's kind of more kind of just updating people on what's happening in the field? The key thing is, whatever decision you take, when you look at a journal, make sure in their author guidance that they accept the type of publication that you're planning to write, because if they don't, you need to look at other journals for being able to submit your work to them. So I'm just going to unshare this, and then I'm going to share with you a video from a colleague, Stephen Cutler, who talked about his experience of publishing. So let me just unshare this, and hopefully I'll get Stephen's video up. Let me just put that up and share that with you. So hopefully you'll all be able to see and hear this.
Hi everyone. So Fiona's asked me along today to just drop a line and drop you a video to describe what happened when I was chosen to get published. And essentially what happened was I contacted the RCM Direct, so the nursing standard, and I said to them, look, I've got an idea for an article, and I think this would be a really good call to go down. And we started just talking about what type of article it should be. So my first step there is, what type of article do you want to publish? Okay, and you can relate this back to within the nursing standard. There's a template in which we could follow. So yeah, essentially you can do that. Also, we can speak to them, as in the editors, and we can ask the editors where they think it might fit in as well. So go back and check your guidelines as to how to write it out. My top tip will always be just remember this is your own words, and just remember your own voice in an article. Okay, so just think about how your voice is projected into that. When editors say want to change your own certain things, take that on board, then ask them what they want to essentially. You don't want to change that too much, because you don't want to change your voice too much essentially. So that's tip number 2, make sure your voice is your voice. And tip number 3 is remember, kind of carrying on from that, remember that you're selling their article for them, because people want to read this magazine because they want to read about you. So just try not to have too altered, try not to alter yourself too much. My biggest tip of all is just to get something down on paper. Just get something down on paper, use it, and just you might forget it for 3 months, but just get something down on paper. You might think you've got writer's block, but if you just even get a word down, say that's it, that's what I want to do. I want to do something around blood pressure or whatever your topic is. Just get something down on paper, because unless you get something down on paper, these thoughts just go away. Trust me. Okay. I hope you had a good session today. I can't join you live for the experience, but I hope it's been helpful. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.
Okay, so that was Stephen. Hopefully he was a bit quiet, but hopefully you heard him. So and the point about getting something down on paper is really key. So sometimes when you've got a blank piece of paper in front of you, you think, oh goodness, where am I going to start? And what I do is I will often kind of just start with the topic, and then I go on, and when I've decided which journal I'm going to publish with, I will go on to their website and will find something called the author guidelines. And often the author guidelines will give you a structure for what needs to be included in the publication of that style with that journal. So I usually will copy the author guidelines and I'll put those into a Word template. And then I just sort out what the structure is. And then a really easy place then to start is by writing the background. So I tend to write the abstract last after I've written everything else. And sometimes they ask you for knowledge questions or knowledge tests or something like that. Those sorts of things I always tend to write last. I'll always start with what I know about, and a kind of more straightforward thing to write, which is the introduction. Now, different people write in different ways, but I tend to write it then quite linearly. That I'll write the introduction, and then I write the methods, and then I write results, and then I write the discussion, and then I write the conclusion. And sometimes it takes a little while to get into writing, so I also make sure that when I write, I will do it working at home. I will block time in my diary. You need at least 3 hours to make any real progress with writing for publication, so I'll block a morning or an afternoon. I know that's really challenging in the diary, and believe you me, I find it challenging to find that time, but if you kind of think well in advance and block your diary well in advance, then that's a helpful thing to do. Sometimes I use something called the Pomodoro technique, which is the Pomodoro's Spanish for tomato, and like those little kitchen timers with a tomato. And sometimes I'll set the timer and I give myself that long to write. And when the timer goes off, I stop writing, and even if that's mid-sentence. So another thing that I found helpful is that if I'm writing, if I leave something in the middle of a paragraph or mid-sentence when I need to go back and finish it, when I go back to finish it, it's much easier to get into it if I've got that sentence that wasn't finished to do that first and pick up, or that paragraph that wasn't finished. So sometimes leaving something a bit unfinished rather than leaving it at the end of a section and go, right, I'll start the section when I start writing again. If you kind of leave something about unfinished, it helps when you pick it up to start writing again. And what I would say is don't leave it too long. If you're writing a manuscript, try and kind of do it in a finite period of time over a few weeks or a month. Don't sort of span it out any longer, because you'll just keep forgetting, and every time you go back to it you have to remember. And then the other thing about that is, you know, if you leave it too long, what you want to write about dates really quickly. So it's also kind of helpful just to actually put some timelines around it. So organising your time is really key. And the other thing that Stephen mentioned was about having your own voice. And again, it's really important that you know, it's written with your voice. Yeah, it has to be written objectively, because you know, it's a publication. You have to follow the author's guidelines. But when you read the sentences, you kind of want to recognise that they're your sentences. You wrote that. So using your own voice. So a really important thing to know if you're publishing is look at the instructions to the authors. If you submit something and you haven't followed the author guidelines, your work will be rejected by the editor immediately. So follow the author guidelines. So and you also always should have a beginning and a middle and an end. And I talked then about the structure of background, method, results, discussion, conclusion. And that's how you would write something like a research article or service evaluation or an audit. But if you're writing an opinion piece, for example, or, you know, maybe that you're writing about a specialist area of practice, you still need to have the introduction and you still need to have a conclusion, and the middle bit might vary, but you still need to be able to give the background to provide the context of what it is that you're talking about, the area of practice, the problem that you might be addressing, and you need to have a conclusion. The conclusion has to be based on the discussion that you've presented, and if you've got any findings that you're presenting, those findings, or if it is literature that you've done a literature search, you know, it has to be the conclusions based on the literature that you've presented and discussed. And the other thing to remember always in a conclusion is the conclusion is your conclusion. Therefore, a conclusion should never include references to other people's work. A conclusion is your conclusion based on the work that you've written within that paper. So make sure that whenever you write anything for publication, your conclusion doesn't introduce reference to other people's work or include a new point. It has to be a conclusion of a discussion that's been presented within the piece of work. So the beginning, it should be clear. It should outline the objective of the paper. You should say what the aim of the paper is, and what you're going to be, you know, what the reader, it's signposting the reader, what the reader's going to be reading about, what you've written about, what the subject area is. So this is kind of the context of the study, or the opinion piece or the service evaluation, but with a really clear aim of what the work is about and what you're writing about. You need to provide an argument, so you need to say why it is you've chosen to study this or to write about it. It might be you talk about the causes if it's about a disease. It might be that you're talking about policy if it's a position statement, or context or background for other types of studies such as audit, service evaluation and research. The middle bit is the kind of the meat of it. So the substance of your paper. So that should include sort of methods and results. As I said, if it's a literature review, it will include the manuscripts, the papers that you've identified through a systematic search. It should be completed, or you should always have a discussion following a results section, and the discussion is where you will have the majority of the references for the work, where you'll be referring to other work that's been published on the field. What does this mean for implications for practice? What does it mean in terms of recommendations going forward? Is it identifying any gaps that are yet to be addressed? And what does it mean in terms of other work that needs to be done? Perhaps there needs to be further quality improvement, innovation or research, based on what you've discussed in your work. And as I said, the conclusions, summing up what the implications, recommendations are for practice, based on your own independent judgment and thought, which is based on your discussion in the work, which will have been based on whatever the main body of the work is about, the results, for example, stemming from your original aims. So, in your conclusion, you want to make sure the implications and recommendations for practice are related to your aim and can be followed throughout the work. So once you've written the first draft, that's by no means ready to submit. And, quite often a paper will have, a manuscript will have, maybe kind of 6 or 7 drafts before it's ready for submission. And that's particularly the case if you are co-authoring your publication with other authors. So it may well go through several rounds of being reviewed, refined and revised prior to being submitted. So a number of drafts. So what I do is I always keep, I will always name it as the draft, and I will keep version control. And how I keep version control is I always date the name of the file I'm working on. I always add the date to it so that I'm able to keep good version control, because as I said, you can have many iterations before it's ready for submitting a manuscript. And just to make sure that the grammar sits well, it's not too wordy. So one of the risks often when you're learning to write is you write long run-on sentences where the sentence could be broken down into 2 or 3 shorter sentences, and each of them making their own point, and making sure that the paragraphs really address 1 or 2 points, and the paragraph structure is correct. And you'll get that from reading it aloud. So there's not enough punctuation, or the sentences are too long, or the paragraphs kind of lose focus a bit. You'll find that out by reading the paper, your manuscript, aloud. Asking others to read it and review it. So it may be that you're co-authoring it with others, and you can all kind of comment on kind of one another's contributions, but you might also, someone that you trust, that maybe someone that's experienced at publishing, particularly someone that might have published in the journal that you're planning to submit to before, or somebody that's an academic supervisor, for example, if you ask them if they wouldn't mind reading it and reviewing it. If it's for a broad audience, then you can ask a peer. So if it's going to go into some professional news, it might be that you ask a colleague to have a look at it and see if they understand the point you're trying to make. One of the things you shouldn't ask people to do when they're reviewing it is proofread it. You should do that yourself, but get others to read it to make sure that it kind of seems like a sound argument and they kind of understand the point that that you're trying to make. What's the story? At that point, you want to sleep on it, because you will, some sentences and the way some structures, you think, oh, that sentence is slightly awkward and I need to reword it, but you're really struggling, you can't think how, or you think, I don't think I've really made that point coherently enough, or I don't think I've really sold that point enough. And so what you try to do kind of then in the moment isn't just coming to you. So it's always good to sleep on it, and then your thoughts sort themselves out overnight, and then you can come back to it with a fresh eye, and you can do that sort of refinement. Submit it, but be ready for a rejection or revision. So it's part of the process to be rejected and revised, even if you're really experienced. author. I submitted something with some colleagues recently, and we submitted it to a journal which we thought was the appropriate journal for that piece of work, but the editor sort of rejected it straight away and said that because of the high demands of submissions, they were having a very kind of narrow focus for what they wanted to publish in their journal, and therefore that was slightly out of the scope of that journal, and suggested we submit it somewhere else. That's not usual, but that does happen sometimes. It's more likely that you submit it and then it goes to the editor or forward it to reviewers, and reviewers send you comments, and you need to make revisions to those comments. So that process, you submit it. So what we'd say first of all about submission is it can take a few hours to submit. Sometimes everything needs to be in one file, sometimes it needs to be in a number of different files. Again, you need to follow the author guidelines for that journal, but when you submit it, you might have to sign things like declaration of conflict of interest or transfer of copyright, and some forms like that, and it can be a bit time consuming to do. So I always allow at least a couple of hours for the actual submission. You can wait a long time to hear about a decision, whether they've accepted it, or whether they, would be willing to look at it for publication. But it's been reviewed and there's some comments, and it requires either minor revision or major revision. So usually, if you get a kind of rejection, that's very quickly you'll hear about that. Otherwise, you might have to wait weeks, maybe even months, for the journal to come back to you, and that's usually because they're taking time to find reviewers to review it and send them comments, for them to collate those comments to then send back to you. So usually peer review journals will have at least 2 reviewers. Some peer review journals have many more. I have submitted work in the past where there's been 7 different reviewers. So a very high impact journal that's quite tough to get published in. So when you get reviewer comments, the thing is that you work through those really carefully, and you respond to them, you revise your manuscript accordingly, and following again the guidelines that the editor will give you, you resubmit your work. Hopefully on the second resubmission they'll accept it, but sometimes it needs to go through another round of revision, and then once it's been accepted, there are further stages, so I'll talk about those in a moment. So the road to publishing isn't easy, and there is a new streamlined peer review process with some journals. They're kind of really trying to sort of speed up, and when you submit to them, they will send you evaluation questionnaires that how well did we do, doing their own evaluation, and one of the key things that authors want is that this is as speedy as process as possible. So journals do what they can to get things through that review process as quickly as possible, but it can be several months, it can be quite lengthy. So you might be able to work towards a deadline for submitting it, but you will have little control about what the deadline will be, the date will be for publication once it's submitted. So it's worth knowing that. And the other thing it's worth knowing is when you've submitted, you might make months for a response, but when you get the email back, they'll want you to respond to it really quickly, maybe in a week or a couple of weeks. And when it's later stages and it's just copywriting and proofreading, it might be a couple of days. So it will always ask you as well if there are any dates that you're not available. So it's helpful also to share information about when you've got annual leave booked in the next sort of 6 months, for example. So I just talked to you about reviewer comments. So I just wanted to focus on that a little bit further. So I've just popped here some example of reviewer comments and responses that I gave. So this was a paper that I published last year, and it had 2 reviewers, and we submitted it and it was sent to reviewers. and they sent back a list of comments, and I think each of the reviewers sent about 10 comments, but in the left-hand column are the comments, and in the right-hand column is my response to those comments that were raised. So this reviewer said, generally this is a good paper, a solid topic, and it fits the purview with the exceptions described below. The research is somewhat limited in the sample of only one facility evaluated and only one particular area of a hospital, the oncology waiting room. However, the research approach methods survey were good. So basically they're noticing that there's a limitation there because it's a single study site. And so you always thank the reviewer for the comment. It's thanks for your positive feedback about the research approach and method. We acknowledge using a sample from one facility to test our hypothesis as a limitation of the study. So you basically say, yeah, we know that was, a limited sample size. We know that. So it's just acknowledging that. The next comment was in table 3, so it can be really quite specific. What does the author mean by recipes? Is there a better word that can be used? And recipes was the word that the statistician that we were working with used. So we spoke with the medical statistician and said, what's the better word? And they came up with configuration. So again, thanking them for their comment and a suggestion. And to address your point, we've replaced the word recipes with configuration throughout the manuscript. Then the other reviewer says, define wayfinding through your paper. So we'd use this term wayfinding, which is how patients find their way from the front door to the place where their appointment is. So again, we thanked them and we defined wayfinding earlier in the paper as the ability to orientate and navigate to the space effectively. And we've also included wayfinding is to navigate from one of the entrances of the hospital to the cancer and haematology outpatients department, following signage displayed on hospital walls, suspended from ceilings, and on site maps. So again, really specific comment and very specific response. And then finally, challenges encountered with data collection, the timing and consistency of the distribution of the survey may have biased the final composition of the sample, hence is the applicability of the results. And again, it's thanks for your comments and appreciating the challenge of the data collection from the cancer treatment context. We expanded our discussion of the challenges of the data collection on the actual clinic experiences, clinic users' experiences, and we fully recognise that the illness and treatment restricted our ability to collect data. The pressure on frontline staff undoubtedly limited their capacity to help expand the sample. So we didn't say, oh, we'll go back and collect more data. We just said, yes, that's a limitation, and we'll highlight that within our paper, that people might read the paper and deem it as being, not the highest quality because we had a limitation in the amount of data that we were able to collect. So that's how I tend to respond to reviewer comments, and often again there will be guidance that is given to authors about how they want the comments responded to, but normally they want them in a table for you to provide a response to each comment. Then the editor will email you and say, dear author, thanks for choosing, and your publication's been accepted. So you get a notification of acceptance, and that's usually an email. And on notification of acceptance, you ought to let your the nursing or midwifery lead for your clinical group know that you've had a publication that's been accepted. Once it's accepted, it goes through a process of proofreading, and the publishers need a quick response. So I just wanted to give you this is the proofreading process that happens before typesetting. So typesetting is when it's all kind of finally formatted, and then just so you get an idea that this happens really quickly. When we get to this stage, you need to be around. So on the Friday, I got an email to say, I'm managing your article to get a proof to you later today. Will you be around to check it then or over the weekend? Could you send me the data for the graphs and charts to check that they are correct? So that's another thing. They might ask you for some of the raw data you collected. If you are presenting analysis of that data, they might want to just check that you haven't made the numbers up, for example, and that all of the numbers that are in the paper are correct and tally with the data that you've collected and analysed. So I did that, and I sent that back to them on the Sunday, and then on the Monday they sent me an email saying, please find attached the first proof of your article. There are some numbered questions and edits to check. Could you give me give the text a read, check it's okay, and answer the questions as numbered, or make up by marking up the PDF. So telling you how they want you to get the response. I'll line up the text and send you another proof. Once the questions have been answered, I should be able to get another proof to you tomorrow morning. So I did that on the Monday evening. I sent it back to them. On the Tuesday, please find attached another proof of your article with the references. I've made a couple of amendments to the references. Please check they're okay. I did that on the Tuesday. On the Wednesday, we will be proofreading the article tomorrow before we send it to press. So if you have any final corrections, please email us by 11 a.m. tomorrow morning, Thursday. So it's a really tight turnaround. So they'll send it to you about a week before it's due to go to press, and you need to kind of make all those final corrections. So it's worth kind of knowing that when you get to that stage, you need to be around to respond really quickly and prioritize responding. So once you've published, what you want is to really make sure that the work that you've done has an impact, particularly if it's research, but also for other pieces of work. So publishing in journals with a higher impact factor. So the impact factor is if, let's say, 1,000 articles were published by a journal over a given year, and of all of the publications in that journal over a year, they are referenced in other articles 1,000 times, then each of those publications in that journal have arguably been cited once in another, they've been referenced once in another. So the impact factor would be 1. So for nursing articles, what you're kind of looking for is impact factor above 1. And for kind of really for nursing journals, the impact factor tends to be between sort of 1 and 3.5. For medical journals, because they're read much more frequently, impact factors tend to be between about 15 and 30 because they get cited more often. And for other types of publication, like a scientific, a biological scientific paper, it might be that the impact factor is between 20 and 35, for example. So, so impact factor is how many times does a publication in that journal get referenced somewhere else, get cited by other authors. And the higher the impact factor, you know, the better quality the article is deemed to be, or that journal is being deemed to be. It's good to aim for a relevant journal. So you want to sort of, first of all, aim for a journal with a higher impact factor rather than a lower one. But also you need to consider the relevancy of this journal. So not just a journal that's got a higher impact factor, but also think about a journal that's really relevant. And if the manuscript gets rejected, you're going for high impact, and again, no, this is not the quality of the type of work that we want to publish, then rework it and submit it to another journal. And when you do that, you'll probably submit it to another journal that's got a slightly lower impact factor. Having said that, impact factor is not the only indicator for impact, and I just want to share with you some examples for impact that are not about impact factor from work that I've done. And you know, this can include other types of impact, can include social media, socialization, sharing it with patient public involvement engagement groups, submitting it for awards, presenting it at a conference, having the findings included in policy or being referenced in education, evidence has kind of been implemented in practice, which is arguably the most meaningful impact. So it's not all about impact factor, which is very much a kind of indicator that's looked at for staff that work in universities. But we really need to think more widely about what impact is all about. So just some examples. So this is some work that I did with teenagers and young adults who have bone cancer, and these are a couple of publications of research, publications from that study. And what I did was the findings with this study. I presented these findings to a workshop of patients and carers. So this is teenagers with cancer and on the whole, their parents. And I came to talk to them about, you know, what research I'd done, what we'd found out from the research, and what the findings were and how we were taking them forward. So that's impact, and that allowed me to be asked questions by patients and carers about the study and what we were planning to do with it. So that's a example of impact. I also presented it at the Bone Cancer Research Trust conference, and this was attended by healthcare professionals and also by patients and carers. So this is another way of demonstrating impact. And the study was funded by the Bone Cancer Research Trust. So this was me reporting back to the Bone Cancer Research Trust what we'd done with their funding. I submitted it, the research for an award, the RCN Excellence in Cancer Research Award, won that award, which was great because it, you know, brought a lot of media attention, and it meant that the topic of teenage and young adult cancer was, you know, then kind of widely talked about in the nursing literature. So it was good for the university that I worked at the time. It was good for bone cancer research who'd funded the work. It was good for clinical trials because it was focusing on you know, teenagers and young adults in clinical trials. But most of all, it was good for young people who had cancer, because it really got their experience and how they're managed and cared for out into the professional press, and kind of shared their experience more widely. I was invited as an outcome of that to take part in a RCN roundtable event where we talked about how we might improve clinical trials. So it had an impact there because I was able to cite the work there. I was also invited by Cancer Research UK to go and speak at that work at a global cancer conference, which was held in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, to talk about the work and how we can effectively, more effectively communicate with people with cancer about participating in clinical trials. So again, that was sort of a result of this research. And sharing those sort of key recommendations with colleagues from around the world. I was also asked on the back of this work if I would join a European group, which was the European Cancer Care Organisation. It was funded by the EU to develop some standards. So the standards were called the Essential Requirements for Quality Cancer Care. I joined the team, and it was the first of its time that included a section on nursing and standards for nursing, and that was presented at the European Cancer Care Organisation conference in 2017. So, and this was then referenced in European policy about caring for patients who had soft tissue sarcoma and bone cancer. So there's lots of impact that you can have from publishing. It's you know, great for your CV. It's great for your professional group and educating your colleagues, and it's great for the profession. So it's also good for your organisation. It gives your organisation profile of somewhere where quality work is happening. So what I would say about publishing is that it's helpful to get a mentor or somebody to support you. It might be an academic supervisor when you first learn about how to go through the process of publishing, but you'll get lots of support when you do. You'll get lots of feedback from reviewers, so it's worth giving a go. And it's absolutely great when you first see your name published, and it's a huge achievement. So I would really recommend publishing if you're interested in doing that. ACORN, so the Centre of Research for Nursing and Midwives, the trust-wide group, which is run by Professor Suzanne Bench, has a database of all the published articles from our teams. So the clinical group leads collect that information from colleagues within their clinical groups and share that with Suzanne and Alessandro. So if you do publish it, also let ACORN know. And if you need any support at all for taking any work forward that you wish to publish, please do contact the ACORN team at Nursing Midwifery Research at gstt.nhs.uk. So I'm just going to